Election season is a challenging time, even in a normal year, but so far 2020 has defied nearly every convention. If angst, anger, and unhappiness about the upcoming presidential election is causing problems between you and your loved ones, you are not alone. There is even a name for it: election stress disorder. The term was coined by couples therapist Steven Stosny to describe what he started seeing in patients during the last election cycle. Dr. Stosny also founded the organization Compassion Power, and he joins us now from Maryland. Dr. Stosny, so it's fascinating, I think, to us that you came up with this term during the last election. I only imagine how stress levels for a lot of people have gone way, way up this time around. What are you seeing from people that you've spoken to, some of the patients you've interacted with?
A lot of resentment, a lot of hostility, a lot of devaluing. They don't just disagree, they devalue as they disagree. You know that you have election stress disorder if you feel your body tense before you turn on the news. That's your body preparing you for a saber-toothed tiger with lots of cortisol.
That's really interesting. I thought it was interesting you said in a recent interview that, you know, when you think back of all the other sort of elections that you have lived through personally, there's always attacks back and forth, but this is the first time that you see actual voters being attacked as well. And it's very personal. If you support this person, you must be an idiot. How are we supposed to cope with this barrage of, you know, what often seems like bad news, or sometimes it's just perceived bad news, bad omens? I mean, we talk a lot about fake news. I see all kinds of wacky stuff on social media that I know isn't true, but all that stuff has to affect, you know, your psychological balance. How do you handle that?
It does affect your psychological balance because anxiety is a general central nervous system response. In other words, not just what triggered it. You get your alert system is on high alert all the time. And the way that most people deal with anxiety is to blame it on someone. And unfortunately, the law of blame is that usually eventually will go to the closest person, your partner or children.
So, Dr. Stosny, as you know, we're living in a very polarized country. You know, no matter who is going to take that oath of office, at least one half of voters will be very unhappy. But I wonder how much social media is exacerbating this. In other words, oftentimes, you know, I'll get attacked on social media. Somebody will call me an idiot or fake news, or even say something like, you know, I think that, you know, I hate your tie, you must be an idiot. I mean, you get all sorts of vitriol when people are dealing with another individual and it's impersonal. You're texting somebody, or you're tweeting somebody, or you're reaching out to somebody on Facebook. But oftentimes I found that if I choose to engage with that person and I say, hey, you know, thanks for your suggestion, or thanks for, you know, reaching out, that I get a completely different response. If they're not a Russian bot, if it's a real person, they generally will say, hey, yeah, you know, I got maybe a little heated. I really do love your work, or I really think you're great, or, you know, thanks for reaching out. So I wonder, is part of the angst that we're seeing, is part of the sentiment that perhaps folks who see the world differently from the way you do or the way I do is just because of social media for the most part, and not real. It's not real life.
Yeah, social media certainly exacerbates it. What you did when you reached out to that person, you were respectful. Anger comes when people feel disrespected. Social media gives you a voice, but not an individuality. So people are frustrated on it. I can express what I feel, but nobody cares because there's so many tweets, so many messages that I just get lost in the storm. So the idea is, if you're going to talk to someone about the election or politics in general, be respectful. And focus on deeper values, things like compassion and equality and justice, because people tend to agree on the values. They disagree on the policies.
I'm curious if you think, sort of layered on top of everything now since, January or so, has been the coronavirus pandemic. And the fact that for many of us, we're just physically not interacting with people the way that we used to. Today I heard some advice from the CDC about Thanksgiving, and the recommendation was that people should maybe do a Zoom Thanksgiving. And I thought, that'll be shortly after the election, and that could be good and that could be bad. Many people talk about how they dread Thanksgiving because they know they're going to have these horrible conversations about politics. But this year, they haven't been able to interact with their family members at all. I wonder who's worse off in this environment. The people who are actually living with maybe a spouse or living with partners, and so they're sort of confined to this small space, and the only person they can take their stress out on is this other person who loves them tremendously, I presume, or people who are single and there's no outlet for them at all. Who has it worse off?
Oh, I think the single person has it worse off because even though you're blaming your partner, there are going to be moments of connection. Isolation is the worst thing with anxiety because the anxiety is going to turn into paranoia. The extreme examples of that are the people go and shoot people from towers. They're isolated and they get super paranoid. Now, most of us aren't that extreme, but COVID certainly has raised the general stress level as well as the confrontations about social justice. These are all, and the horrible videos we've seen, those are all contributing to a general level of stress. And it is not specific to the election. The election just fuels it. Any negative emotion a politician is going to make worse.
Yeah,
Doctor, before we let you go, I was going to say just very quickly, and Vlad, you can jump in as well. We're going to have an election. Roughly 50% of the people in this country are going to be disappointed with the outcome of the election. 50% won't. Give us sort of your strongest bit of advice moving forward after the election so we can all be a lot happier.
Well, focus on things you can control. You feel powerless when you focus on things you can't control. So focus on making your life better and more meaningful, making better connections in your life. And if you want to empower yourself politically, lobby Congress, write letters, go to demonstrations. But try not to get obsessed because the human brain doesn't function well when it's obsessing about anything, but particularly about things out of your control.
Dr. Stosny, that was sort of similar to my point, or to my question for you, which is, does it make sense, and I think Anne-Marie and I have talked about this before, one of the things that I try to do whenever anything derails in my own personal life is I think about some of the places that I've been privileged to report from where people don't have the privileges that I have, in some really terrible, dire straits that they find themselves in. Or I think about just people in the past who've struggled with what feels to me, at least, to be a greater a rock to push up a hill. People who lived through the Great Depression, people who lived through the London Blitz and had to live in the underground, in the tubes for years sometimes before being able to return to their homes and see their families. The Civil Rights Movement. Is that a way to think about it, or is that a way to sort of push aside the feelings that you have and not really address them?
No, I think it's an excellent way to regulate negative emotions because it makes you appreciate the resilience of the human spirit. And that's what we have to keep track of. This is a temporary condition. It will eventually pass, and our lives will get better. The election will be over, and things will even out. I'd like to leave you with this one issue, though. Late in life or on your deathbed, you're not going to regret disagreeing with whoever won the election. What you're going to regret is not being as compassionate and kind as you could have been, especially to the people you love. We know a lot about regret from research, and that's mostly what it's about, not politics, how you deal with people on an individual level.
Looking for that tissue box right now.
That is a pearl of wisdom. Oh, yeah, you can take that. You can take that to the bank. Dr. Steven Stosny, thank you so much. That's excellent.
Well, thank you for having me.